Today we will talk about photosynthesis, but instead of talking in terms of very general terms, now we're going to get into the chemical reactions, and in particular into redox reactions that occur to produce photosynthesis. And we're going to talk about three main concepts. After this lecture, I want that you remember that photosynthesis converts light energy to chemical energy of food. This is the first thing that I want you to remember. The second thing that I want that you remember is that photosynthesis has some like reactions that convert solar energy to chemical energy. Of these two molecules, ATP that we have talked before, and now we have a new molecule here, NADPH. And while in cellular respiration you have NADH, here we have NADPH. That is slightly different, but it also has a similar function. It is transport electrons. And finally, the third thing that I wanted you to remember is a process called Calvin cycle that uses chemical energy from the ATP, so the energy that we got here, all these things that we got here, to reduce CO2 to sugar. So let's start. We're going to divide the class into 4 key points. I'm going to give you a small introduction about photosynthesis, then I'm going to talk about the first process, the light reactions, then I'm going to talk about the Calvin cycle, and finally I will do a small review. So let's start with the first point. Now we're going to talk about the importance of photosynthesis to the entire biosphere. And here we have a lot of examples of different plants growing in the trees, growing on the floor. But the main idea I want that you remember is that photosynthesis converts solar energy, so you have here the sun, into chemical energy. And in that way, they directly or indirectly nourishes almost every living organism. If we don't have plants, we will not have animals. And this is very important because we are cutting forests like the Amazon. So we are creating an imbalance in nature. So remember, third time that I repeat in 2 minutes, photosynthesis convert what type of energy? Solar energy. In which one? Chemical energy. Second thing that I told you is that directly or indirectly, photosynthesis nourishes almost the entire living world. So as I said, if we don't have plants, if we don't have the Amazons, if we don't have all the forests that we have in Canada, life will stop existing. To continue the introduction of photosynthesis, I'm just going to show you something that you already know by memory, by heart, because you studied this in high school, that you need inorganic compounds like CO2 and water, and you add sunlight and photosynthesis, and as a result, two products, glucose and oxygen. In this class, we will talk about all the intermediate reactions that take place because this doesn't happen in one chemical reaction. And photosynthesis has two Greek roots. One that is photo, that means light, and synthesis, that is a whole made of parts that are put together. So it's using light to put all our organic chemicals together. So let's recap. We talk about that there are two Greek roots, photo and synthesis, that are important to remember. The second thing that I talked in the beginning is that we use the sun to synthesize organic compounds like sugar. And how you do it? Those come from inorganic compounds like CO2 and water. And there are so many organisms that perform photosynthesis. We have plants, like this one, but we also have some bacteria like cyanobacteria, and you will study this with Rachel in more detail. You have purple bacteria, and you have even protists in charge of doing that. And in class, I will show you some exceptions that even some animals, for very strange reasons, also can perform photosynthesis. But I want that you leave this class and you remember that photosynthesis occurs in plant and algae, in protists and also in some bacteria. And also that these organisms not only fed themselves, but fed the entire living world. Now we're going to talk about where does photosynthesis occur. And to that we have this diagram that starts talking about here in the microscopic, from a macroscopic perspective, and here we can go even to a microscopic perspective, and here you can see a chloroplast. So let's start. The first thing that I want that you see here is that in the leaf you have different structures. First, this is a cross section. If you see here, you see that you have these structures that are called stomas, and they are in charge of letting in the CO2 and exit the oxygen. You can also see that the chloroplasts are not located outside, they are located in the mesophyll, and they concentrate in this region of the mesophyll. If you see all these green dots that are here are chloroplasts. And the third thing is these veins, that they are the one that are in charge of bringing water and other minerals. So three things I told you, that the chloroplasts are concentrated in the cells of the mesophyll, in the green tissue in the interior of the leaf. The second thing that I told you is that there are two structures that are called stomas, that allow that the carbon dioxide enter into the cell and the oxygen exit the cell. So here CO2 getting in, here you can see oxygen getting out. And finally, the third thing that I told you, from a macroscopic perspective, you can see that there are veins in the leaf that deliver water and absorbed by the roots. So here I show you the veins. Now we're going to talk about the structure of the chloroplast. And the first thing that I want that you see is that they have one outer membrane, and they not only have one outer membrane, they have two outer membrane, what is very interesting. And I will show you a video later of why we think that they have two membranes. And here you have this intermembrane space in between the two membranes. Now I want that you see two very important structures. One that is the stroma, that is the liquid inside of the chloroplast, and the other one is the thylakoid. The thylakoid is the sac of membranes, of this network of membranes. And why those are important? Because some part of the photosynthesis will occur in the stroma and the other one will occur in this membrane, in the thylakoids. So to recap again, first thing that I told you is that chloroplast consists of an envelope of two membranes which enclose an inner compartment filled with a thick fluid called stroma. And I show you here that it is the stroma, it's all this section. And on the other hand, it also contains a system of interconnected membranous sacs called thylakoids. So here you can see the thylakoids, and these are very important because one part, the beginning of the photosynthesis, the light reactions will occur there. Now I want that you watch this movie, this video clip about the chloroplast structure.
Like most organelles in a eukaryotic cell, chloroplasts are surrounded by a bilayered membrane called chloroplast envelope and are disc-shaped. While the outer membrane is freely permeable to molecules, the inner membrane is selectively permeable and contains many transporters, such as the integral membrane proteins, which regulate the passage of small molecules like sugars in and out of the chloroplast. The inner membrane encloses a protein-rich ground substance called stroma. The fluid in the stroma contains a host of enzymes, plastid DNA, RNAs, and ribosomes. Within the stroma is another membrane system called the thylakoids. The three-membrane system divides chloroplasts into three distinct internal compartments: 1. The intermembrane space between the inner and outer membranes of the chloroplast envelope. 2. The stroma, which lies inside the envelope but outside the thylakoid membrane. And 3. The thylakoid lumen. The thylakoid membrane is a network of membrane-bound flattened discs called thylakoids, which are arranged in stacks called grana. The membranes of thylakoids are called fret membranes, and the grana are interconnected by tubular membranes called the intergranal lamellae. Each chloroplast may contain 10 to 30 granule clusters with a single granum comprising about 20 to 60 thylakoids. The thylakoid membranes are made up of 20 to 30% lipids and 70 to 80% proteins. They also contain a large number of granular structures embedded in the membranes. These granules are called quantasomes. Quantasomes are responsible for capturing photons of solar electromagnetic radiation and act as photosynthetic units. The larger granules are called photosystem II or PS2, and the smaller granules are known as photosystem I or PS1. The intergranal lamellae lack photosystem II but contain only photosystem I. The thylakoids contain photosynthetic pigments, namely the green pigments chlorophyll A and B, and the yellow to red pigments called carotenoids. Due to the three-membrane structure, the internal organization of the chloroplasts is more complex than in other organelles.
Now that you watched that video clip, I wanted to remind you that I'm sure that you know what is a stroma, what is the thylakoid. You know that this structure, this stack of thylakoids are called grana, and you can see here the diagram, and here you see a real picture of a chloroplast. And there are two things that I wanted you to remember in addition. One is that if you remember the cell membrane, in the cellular respiration you have proteins that they transfer electrons, and at the end you produce water to transfer those electrons, and also you use the ATP synthase to bring the protons down and produce ATP. Or this resemble a lot what happened during photosynthesis, because all the proteins will be in the thylakoid membrane, and also change that transport electrons will also take place in the chloroplast. So first thing that I want that you remember, that the thylakoids are often concentrated in stacks called grana, as you watch here and also in the video, and also you can see them here. Second thing that I want that you remember, that the thylakoid space functions analogous to the intermembrane space of a mitochondria. And the third thing that I want that you remember is that the thylakoid membranes house much of the machinery that convert light into chemical energy.